Hi there, and welcome to One Body, One Life, proudly sponsored by Jamae's Fine Foods. I'm Vicki Nguyen, and I'm on a personal mission to live to 120, and I would absolutely love to take you on this journey with me. This fortnightly show is focused on longevity and understanding how we can all live longer and stronger through diet, exercise, lifestyle, nutrition, and so on. Each episode, we will uncover tips and tricks to living your healthiest and happiest life for as long as physically possible. I'll be chatting to the experts as well as people who have defied the odds and explore various treatments and modalities to help us all reach optimal wellness. So Dr. Alan Desmond, medical doctor, gastroenterologist, general physician and author, or best-selling author, should we say, of The Plant-Based Diet Revolution. He currently lives with his family in Devon, UK, and works as a full-time NHS consultant. Certified in both gastroenterology and general internal medicine, Alan completed his specialist training in Ireland and Oxford. He has special interests in the role of diet in the prevention and treatment of digestive diseases. As a doctor specialising in gut health, Alan has made evidence-based dietary advice an essential part of his clinical practice. The results he has seen in his gastroenterology clinic have led him to become a dedicated advocate for the gut health benefits and overall health benefits of a whole food plant-based approach to nutrition. Dr. Alan Desmond believes that we can transform our health and revolutionise our quality of life by simply eating more plants, and that the evidence overwhelmingly supports a whole food plant-based diet as the optimal diet for human health and longevity. The more plant-based, the better. Alan has presented at numerous international conferences alongside renowned plant-based advocates and has also published several influential research papers in the field of inflammatory bowel disease. So welcome to the show, Alan.
Vicki, thanks very much for having me. Really kind of you to invite me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm so curious and I'm so excited to have this chat with you today because I myself have had my own fair share of gut issues. So this is a really great opportunity. So tell us, give us the listeners your backstory. Like, how did you land here where you are today?
Oh, of course. Well, I'm a doctor, Vicki, as you said. I went into medical school in the mid-90s, graduated 2001. Became a consultant or attending consultant gastroenterologist in 2012. And when you're a doctor who deals with people with digestive health problems for a living, you soon realize that every single patient asks you, what about food, doctor?
Yes.
Is there any food that I should be eating or avoiding? And as a gastroenterologist, I responded to those questions that every single patient, I would say 99% of patients would ask their gastroenterologist about food. So I responded to those requests from my patients, and throughout my career, as well as reading the literature and medical journals and textbooks and going to conferences around the latest medication or the latest endoscopic technique or whatever. Right. I've also been looking at the latest research on the impact of food on our digestive health and overall health, so that when my patients say to me, what about food, doctor? I can give them some really well-informed and evidence-based recommendations. And I'm really lucky to work with teams of dietitians who are on the same page. And once I started talking to my patients about eating more fruit, eating more vegetables, eating more whole grains and reducing their intake of animal products and removing highly processed junk food from their diet, I started seeing some incredible changes in my patients at clinic and incredible successes. And that just led me to become more vocal about this.
Yes.
And to start speaking at conferences and taking every opportunity to educate the public, my fellow health professionals, doctors, patients, policymakers on the fact that food is incredibly important and food really does matter.
So what about yourself and your own journey?
Well, I mean, when you're training to be a doctor, so I went to med school in 95, graduated 2001. So from about 2001 to 2012, apart from a few breaks, for research, etc., I was living that sort of intense, dramatic, incredibly all-consuming life.
Yes.
That is the life of a hospital doctor in training.
Right.
So working,
long
between
hours.
70 and 110 hours a week, doing 36-hour shifts, 110-hour weekends, no recognized break time, bleep going all night long, moving from doing within an hour, you would go from, assisting at a cardiac arrest in the emergency department to doing some kind of very mundane and boring clerical work to get some lab results ready for the ward round, etc. So
Yes.
it won't surprise you to hear that among doctors in training, diet and health and their individual diet and health seems to drop down the priority list.
Absolutely.
So I couldn't claim that when I was a young doctor that my diet and lifestyle were healthy, because they just weren't. Almost by default, they just weren't.
Yes.
Sleep deprivation was the norm. Just grabbing food at the hospital canteen when you could was the norm. But as I progressed through my career and became more senior, and then in 2012, I'm the attending of the consultant. I'm sitting down with my patients, and now my name is on the chart, and it's my responsibility to work with the patients so they get the best possible outcome.
Yes.
As I began to make this a really crucial part of my own practice, it became very evident to me, Vicki, as you can imagine,
Yes.
that I need to walk the talk.
Yes.
So from about 2016, me, my wife, my family have eaten a completely plant-based diet.
Amazing.
So a whole food plant-based diet. And I didn't identify myself as having any specific health problems when I made that change.
Right.
So I don't have a personal story of health transformation.
Okay.
But I think I did notice that I lost a little bit of excess body fat. I found that in the gym and out for a run, my recovery was a little bit better. Ironically, as a gastroenterologist, I used to get a little bit of heartburn, and that went away. But I don't have a personal journey of health transformation.
Okay.
The health transformations from me happen in the clinic.
Yes, of course. But how refreshing to have a doctor like you to take it upon himself to want to improve the patient's life and look deeper into it. Because, I mean, most of the time, as you know, a lot of doctors, and I don't know if it's because of all the red tape that goes along with that role, but there's not a lot of talk about diet and how you can help yourself through the foods that you eat. It's often just medication prescribed, it's that kind of short fix or, cover the symptom instead.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's, I prescribe medications too. So I'm still a conventionally trained and practicing gastroenterologist. But when we speak to our patients about getting healthy, we need to recognize that the standard Western diet, which is the prevalent approach to food in countries like Australia, the UK, Ireland, and the United States, etc., these high-income countries, the standard Western diet, which is a high meat, high dairy approach to food, high in processed food, high in junk food, low in fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, and low in fiber, low in plants,
Yes.
is actually the major driver of poor health in the world today.
Absolutely.
So I'm from Ireland. That's where I grew up and trained. That's where my family are. But I now live with my wife and kids in the UK, and that's where I practice. And in the UK alone, dietary factors account for more healthy years lost and more disease and disability than alcohol and drug use combined.
Wow.
The food that we eat causes more lives and healthy years of life lost than lack of exercise, for example,
Yes.
or air pollution.
Yep.
And in the US, food is the number one cause of healthy years lost.
Exactly.
So as a doctor or a health professional or a health advocate or a practice nurse or whatever your role is in helping people to optimize their health, if you are telling your patients to not smoke, avoid alcohol or keep their alcohol intake really low,
Yes.
not to do illicit drugs, and to exercise, then you've got to be talking to them about food as well.
Yes.
Because food is a bigger driver of poor health than all of those things.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of it, like, people need to consider that what they eat, that old adage, that old saying, you are what you eat. I mean, it's true, because your food is what feeds your blood and nourishes your body and your cells and your brain and all of that. So it makes perfect sense. But tell us, was there a particular turning point in your career where you said, okay, this is enough. We need to look deeper at what's happening with and seeing the results when you were prescribing more plant-based? Was there a particular turning point for you?
Well, in terms of my clinical practice, I think the turning point came for me just a couple of years after I became a consultant or an attending, because I was basically finding a way to bring this information into my practice. and starting with very simple recommendations to my patients. Because, Vicki, we live in a country where, people get 9% of the calories from fresh fruits and vegetables, where people get, on average, 60% of the calories from ultra-processed foods.
Yes.
Whole grain consumption, legume consumption is at a historic low in terms of human history, okay?
Yeah.
The industrialization of our food chain has really destroyed the sort of meals that we choose to eat. The meals we eat are so far removed from the meals consumed by the healthiest populations in the world,
Yes.
and recommended by international experts as to what makes up a healthy diet, that when we start talking to food to patients in the clinic, we need to start really gently. So I would start talking to my patients about, okay, look, we've gone through everything. We're going to get some tests. You're going to have your colonoscopy, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to make sure there isn't any serious diseases at play here. But while you're here with me at clinic, I'm just going to ask you a few simple questions about alcohol and cigarettes, of course, always important. But how many pieces of fruit do you eat every day? How many servings of vegetables do you eat every day? How many servings of whole grains do you eat every day? And just those three simple questions, they only take a few moments to go through with a patient, will often identify the first target for healthy dietary change. Because if that person is struggling with bloating and constipation or an irregular bowel habit, and if they say to me, look, I don't really eat much fruit, I sometimes will eat an apple each day, and I don't really have vegetables regularly, I might have some broccoli with my evening meal. And if they say to me, when you say whole grain, doc, what exactly do you mean? Are you referring to the bread with the seeds on the top, or what is that? No one's ever told me about this. What's a whole grain? So very often that's how that conversation will go down in a clinic.
Yes.
And if you can have that conversation, explain to the person how important these foods are for gut microbial health and our overall health and our digestive health,
Yes.
and then point them to some resources, the next time they come back to your clinic, they may well say to you, oh my goodness, I'm now eating 3 pieces of fruit per day. I'm focusing on whole grains at each meal. And yes, I'm now eating 3 or 4 servings of vegetables per day. I'm losing weight.
Yes.
I've never felt healthier. My bowel habit has become regular. Tell me more. What other changes can I make? But gladly in my practice, for patients who are receptive to the information, I'll have already pointed them towards some resources. So the stories can be really transformative. And I tell a few of those stories in my book, like the young lady that I met at clinic. It must be back in 2013 now that I met her. But she was a young woman. She was in her 30s. She'd already gathered a long list of medical diagnoses, including type 2 diabetes, irritable bowel syndrome. She was living with obesity. And she had dreadful, what had been labelled as, very severe irritable bowel syndrome.
Right.
So she'd already been to see the gynecologist. She'd even had surgery to open up her tummy to see if there was any problems in there. She'd had tons of scans and tests, etc. And she came to see me, and we went through her medical history, all the multiple scans and scopes and blood tests and surgery that she'd had. And she was a patient, Vicki, who'd been reassured by multiple people that there was nothing serious wrong.
Crazy.
She just had severe IBS.
Right.
But of course, this wasn't helping her. Her life was becoming almost impossible.
Yes.
Yeah, right. She was in the emergency department with abdominal pain. So when I saw her, she'd had tons of investigations already. And as it happened, I did recommend one more scan, which was an MRI scan of her small bowel. But we had the conversation. And like many people, she had this idea that had been given to her by friends or the media, etc., that all carbohydrates cause weight gain.
Right.
So she'd been avoiding eating whole grains. She almost never ate fruit. She was worried because she'd pre-diabetes that fruit would put up her blood sugars, so she was avoiding fruit. So we had that basic conversation. We made just a simple agreement. She would have 3 or 4 servings of whole grains per day. She would begin to snack on whole fruits, and she would opt for legumes and healthy plant-based sources of protein wherever possible. And when she came back to me after 3 months, the MRI scan had been clear, so I explained all that to her. But she told me that her life had changed completely because
Amazing.
after just after 3 months of actively correcting what had been labeled severe IBS, but in my opinion was severe fiber deficiency,
Right.
her symptoms had resolved entirely.
Wow.
She'd experienced healthy weight loss without counting calories. Her type 2 diabetes was far better, easier to control. Her HbA1c blood test had improved very significantly. She was well on the way to correcting her fiber deficiency completely. And her husband had been supporting her along the way, and it had been transformative for them. I mean, I'm not blaming Emma and her husband for their approach to food. This is the approach to food that is given up to us in countries like this as being the way to eat and being, convenient and correct. And it's advertised to us and promoted as a really fun and, modern way to eat, or however we want to phrase it. Because of all this information, people don't eat fresh whole plants.
Exactly.
People are scared to eat healthy carbohydrates, and an unhealthy low fiber diet has become the absolute norm. But so when you get consultations like that happening in your clinic, I was talking to my wife recently about this. I saw another patient at my clinic recently, a lady with ulcerative colitis who'd really transformed her health by making the switch to a whole food plant-based diet. And at the end of the consultation, she just made this comment to me at the very end of our consultation. She said, I've got your book and I'm really looking forward to trying the savory farinata with the spinach and garlic tonight. And I thought, that's great. Oh, thank you. You didn't need to buy the book, but thank you. Lovely. And I came home to my wife that evening and I was telling her about this young woman. This is a different patient now who'd had a tremendous success. And I said, I've never had a patient at my clinic tell me, oh, I just picked up that immune suppressant prescription that you prescribed. Yes. And I can't wait to try it tonight. It's my first night trying it. It's going to be amazing. So I would really, if there are any health professionals listening to this podcast, whether your specialty is respiratory health, cardiac health, endocrine health, if you're dealing with patients with type 2 diabetes, obesity, or any chronic disease, they've got nothing to lose by making the shift to a healthy whole food plant-based diet. And if you start these conversations with your patients, it can transform their health and your approach to medicine.
Totally. 100%. So what are the most common diseases and gut issues you treat or that you find? I mean, obviously we've all heard of irritable bowel and bloatedness and all that, but what are the most common ones that you've come across?
Well, the fact is, is that, you even alluded to this yourself, that digestive health problems have become almost the norm in countries where we have a kind of a westernized, industrialized lifestyle and food chain, which is worrying generally for gastroenterologists. I mean, I've often commented to people how Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, taught his disciples 2.5 millennia ago that all disease begins in the gut, or all health begins in the gut.
Absolutely.
And if that's true, and I think it is true in many ways, particularly when we talk about the importance of the gut microbiome, if it is true that all health begins in the gut, then we're in trouble, Vicky, because so, for example, if we look at the US, the home of the standard Western diet or standard American diet. So 1 in 3 adults under the age of 50 have diverticular disease. It's incredibly prevalent in high-income countries. It's a fiber deficiency problem predominantly. You get these pouches in the side of your large bowel. They can become inflamed and infected. They can cause perforation. They can, in most cases, it's more of a bothersome condition to have rather than life-threatening. But like all gastroenterologists, I've had patients who've died from diverticular perforation. So it is possible to end your life through a diagnosis of diverticular disease. Colorectal cancer, sadly, is something that I deal with a lot in my clinical practice. I'm a colonoscopist, so I do a lot of camera tests to check people to see if they've got precancerous polyps or cancers, and I deal with colorectal cancer a lot. And our patients are getting younger. In the US now, the screening guidelines have just dropped to say adults at the age of 45 should begin screening for colorectal cancer, because colorectal cancer is so prevalent in the US now, thanks to the standard American diet and lifestyle. Another disease which has emerged very much in high-income countries in the last 20 years, since I was at medical school is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Oh, what's that from?
Or NAFLD. So this is a condition whereby our liver is infiltrated by fat tissue.
Goodness.
So when we look at a scan of your liver, it looks kind of, well, if we draw the comparison to the butcher's counter, it looks very well marbled. It's got a lot of fat in it.
Kobe beef style.
Which isn't, exactly, right? Which isn't a healthy state for a human liver.
Right.
And that causes inflammation in the liver. About 25% of people with the abnormal fat in their liver will develop inflammation, which we call non-alcoholic steatohepatitis.
Right.
So they have hepatitis, inflammation of their liver.
Goodness.
And a significant number of those patients will go on to develop cirrhosis and liver failure.
Goodness.
Something that we've always associated with alcohol use, right? But this is so prevalent right now in the US. Between 80 and 100 million people are living with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. In the UK, about 20% of people under the age of 30 already have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So thanks to that, in the US, this is now becoming the most common cause of chronic liver disease and is the leading reason for females in the US to need a liver transplant.
Goodness.
And why is it that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is now the most common reason for needing a liver transplant in the US for females, whereas 50 years ago, it didn't exist, or it was extremely uncommon. It's because the standard American diet, which we've already described, so a high animal product, high processed food, high processed sugar diet, is the perfect diet to give you a swollen, fat-infiltrated liver.
Goodness. Wow. So it's the overconsumption of the meat, the dairy, and like you say, that Western diet that's caused that. That's disgusting.
Yeah, and also the lack of all those healthy foods. I mean, when we look at dietary intakes in countries like the US, I mean, so a few years ago, as you know, the Lancet Medical Journal, which is one of our global leading medical journals, set about answering that incredibly important question that all my patients ask me. What should I eat? But they were looking to answer that question for everybody in the world.
Yes.
So the 3.5 billion people who get too much food, the 800 million people who are suffering from lack of access to food. What's a blueprint for the planet? What would it look like if we were all eating in a way that would make sure we were super healthy as we could be, in a world where food is the major driver of disease? What should we be doing? So they handpicked 38 experts from places like Harvard, University of Oxford, University of London, and got them to look at the evidence. And they concluded that we should be trying to move the world as far as possible towards an unprocessed, plant-predominant, plant-based or plant-exclusive approach to food, where half of our food should be fruits and vegetables, about a quarter should be healthy whole grains, and the remainder should be made up of protein, particularly protein-rich plants like legumes, beans, peas, split peas, lentils, that sort of thing, with a little bit of added unsaturated oils from plants. And meat, eggs, and dairy should be regarded as optional.
Yes.
And if you're in a country where you have the luxury of pretty much being able to eat whatever you choose to, you should regard chicken, fish, eggs, and red meat as optional.
Yes.
And if you do consume them, you should be consuming very little, maybe an ounce of chicken or fish per day, half an egg, maybe, one serving of red meat every 2 to 3 weeks. And that's a recipe for excellent gut health. And Hippocrates was right. It's also a recipe for excellent overall health. And when the Eat Lancet panel of experts looked at decades of evidence on human nutrition and health, they predicted if we could get everybody in the world to eat like that, if we could get them the resources and the food and the education, that we could prevent more than 12 million unnecessary deaths per year.
Wow.
Not to mention, Vicky, hundreds of millions fewer cardiac stents, bypasses, courses of chemotherapy for preventable cancers, prescriptions for statins, blood pressure medications, admissions to hospital, colorectal cancer, perforated diverticular disease, etc. So in many ways, although a lot of people still might hear a doctor like me or any person advocating the benefits of unprocessing your diet and eating more plants. The fact is that the evidence is pretty much in, and this is why a plant-based approach to food has been endorsed as a healthy choice with specific health benefits by so many organizations like the British Dietetic Association, the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the Canadian Healthy Eating Guidelines are plant-based up front now. The American Cancer Society, the World Health Organization, the American Heart Association have put very clearly on their website that whether you're thinking of reducing or giving up meat entirely, it's likely to benefit your health.
Yes.
In fact, last year, August of 2020, the American Medical Association, which is one of the world's oldest and largest professional organizations for doctors, wrote a letter to the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, who are responsible for writing the dietary guidelines for Americans. And they were in the process of updating those guidelines. And the AMA wrote to the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, and said, we, doctors, would like you, the USDA, to stop putting meat and dairy in the dietary guidelines as necessary food groups.
Amazing.
As necessary food groups.
Yes.
Incredible. And pointing out the fact that they're drivers of disease and not necessary. So I think the title of the book is The Plant-Based Diet Revolution. Of course, the secret is the revolution's already started, Vicki.
Yes.
I just want more people to read the science and eat the food.
Absolutely. So, it's very obvious that good digestive health is essential, no doubt about it. But can you please explain to listeners why that is?
Well, in my book at New York Press, I do say that good digestive health is essential. And obviously, we've talked already about many of the benefits of a healthy intake of food. But really, when it comes down to it, and this is one of the things that attracted me into gastroenterology as a practice, is if you've got poor digestive health, you're going to have a bad day every day.
Yes.
Because food is so important to us.
Yeah.
If you've got good digestive health in the morning, you wake up in the morning hungry.
Yes.
You're planning your first meal of the day. If you're heading off to the office, you're already thinking, what will I have for lunch?
Yeah.
Will I take something with me? Will I meet a friend? Will I hit that my favorite little food place down the street from the office? And as soon as you've had that meal, you're planning, what will I have when I get home for my evening meal? Yeah. What have I got in the fridge? Or you might be texting your partner, say, hey, what are we having tonight? What do you fancy for a meal tonight? So if we are unable to sit down with friends when possible in pandemic times, if we're not able to enjoy food and the pleasure of eating and everything that comes with it, our quality of life becomes very, very difficult. And when we look at surveys among individuals with severe digestive health issues like Crohn's disease, we see that among patients with Crohn's disease, 75% of patients will say that they do not have a good quality of life. And that is because their digestive health is not good. So for me as a gastroenterologist, helping people to get back to good digestive health is key.
Absolutely. I know myself, if I eat something that doesn't suit my body, that feeling of being bloated is just such an uncomfortable feeling. So you can only imagine people who have much worse gut issues, how they'd be feeling. So you're absolutely right there. So my grandmother died, my dad's mum died of bowel cancer many, many years ago. And as part of my dad's, his longevity plan, he was recommended to have a colonoscopy every 2 years. So is it true, are gastro and what do you call them, gastric diseases hereditary? And if so, how is that so?
Well, like most conditions that have become common in high-income countries, it's a little bit of both. Okay. So in many cases, and including colorectal cancer, there is a little bit of both. So you do need to have a genetic predisposition, perhaps, to developing a colorectal cancer. But of course, colorectal cancer is so common in countries where we eat the standard Western diet now, that it can't all be about genetics, right? Because if we look, there was a nice study done a few years ago in the United States and rural South Africa. So we know, the epidemiological data tells us that in the United States, if you're an African-American adult, you've got about a 1 in 15, maybe 1 in 17 chance of developing colorectal cancer in your lifetime. Very common. Yep. That's why we need screening.
Right.
Okay, screening remains important.
Yes.
And having surveillance tests, like you mentioned your father having, are important. But if we go to rural South Africa and we look at African adults living in a rural setting, we find that colorectal cancer is almost unheard of. So it can't all be about genetics, right? It just can't be. And there are certain genetic conditions that make your colorectal cancer risk very high, like Lynch syndrome or FAP. But if you don't have one of those syndromes, then it's predominantly a diet and lifestyle problem. Now, if you look at that study that I mentioned that was done in the US and rural Africa a few years ago, at the start of that study, they got all these volunteers from the US and these volunteers from rural Africa. And these amazing volunteers all went through a colonoscopy. And 50% of the Americans had precancerous bowel polyps or adenomas in their large bowel. They didn't find a single adenoma in the African population.
Wow.
There was none.
That's crazy.
Nobody had a precancerous polyp. And they went on to analyze things like their mucosal proliferation rate, their gut microbiome makeup, their production of short-chain fatty acids, which are beneficial, their production of secondary bile acids, which are pro-carcinogenic.
Yes.
And of course, what they found was that the Americans, on every measure, were high risk for colorectal cancer.
Right.
And the Africans, on every measure, were low risk for colorectal cancer.
Incredible.
But what they did next was really incredible. They just got those two groups of volunteers to switch up their diets for 2 weeks.
Oh, goodness.
They just got them to change the food that they put on their plate for 2 weeks.
Yes.
So now the Americans are having, for breakfast, they're having like spinach and red pepper and onions and corn fritters. They're having mango slices and kale salad, napkin potato salad. They're having 55 grams of fiber per day. They're getting 70% of the calories from whole carbohydrates.
Yes.
And now the African volunteers have got 2 weeks of having sausage and pancakes, spaghetti and meatballs, hot dogs and beans, roast beef and mashed potato.
Yes.
They're getting 21% of the calories from carbs. They're getting half the calories from fat and 12 grams of fiber per day. They're eating a standard American diet for 2 weeks. And they came back, did all their analysis after just 2 weeks, and the risk profiles had completely flipped.
Wow.
On every measure, the Americans now had a very low predicted risk of developing colorectal cancer, and the Africans, on every measure, had a high risk profile for developing colorectal cancer in just 2 weeks.
That's incredible.
So it's incredible just by switching up the food they put on their plate 3 times a day.
But amazing in such a short time that those results can flip like that.
No, you're right. I mean, this was a short-term study, but you know, it was just a 2-week study, but a very detailed study.
Yes,
right? But it's just an incredible paper, and of course, this reflects what we know in clinical practice. And we know when we look at the evidence that if we want to have patients reduce their risk of colorectal cancer, we need to talk to them about eating more fruits and vegetables, eating more whole grains, completely avoiding red and processed meat.
Yes.
Completely avoiding them. There is no safe level of consumption, particularly for processed meat like hot dog and bacon and that sort of thing. Eating more plants, focusing on legumes are incredibly protective. So I like my patients to eat calcium-rich legumes like beans and soybeans, etc. And whatever your risk profile. So at my clinic and at my hospital, if you come for a screening colonoscopy like your father does every 2 years, about 2 weeks later in the post, you get a glossy, full-color brochure explaining all of this.
Amazing.
Because as well as coming for screening colonoscopies, there's a bunch of other stuff you can do to profoundly reduce your risk.
Yes.
And yes, avoiding alcohol and not smoking are also important.
Yes, amazing. So do you think, is it absolutely necessary to have a gastroscopy and colonoscopy to determine your gut health? And if the result is a squeaky clean result, does that really mean that you're free from irritable bowel or leaky gut or anything else? So is it worth having these very invasive tests, considering they may not be conclusive as to what's going on in the body?
I think it is worth it.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, if you have significant digestive health symptoms, I would advocate always seeing your family doctor.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because serious diseases are relatively uncommon. I mean, your individual risk might be relatively low, but they are quite prevalent.
Right.
And it's important. And when we're looking at diagnoses, that could be something like colorectal cancer or a malignancy.
Yes.
If something is detected early, the earlier the detection, the better.
Right.
So if you've seen, for example, blood in your poo,
yes,
go and have a chat with your doctor.
Yes.
Because even if your doctor has never read any of the science that we've talked about today, and even if they're one of those doctors who thinks that food doesn't matter, they still know that blood in your poo is serious.
Yes.
And they will do a panel of blood tests. They might do a stool test. And depending on your overall story and symptomatology, they may refer you to a gastroenterologist to have some camera tests.
Okay.
And so I would view that as very important. If you've got significant symptoms,
yes,
you ought to go and have a chat with your doc. And I've been talking a lot this year at various conferences to doctors and medical professionals about the evidence, for example, about reducing colorectal cancer risk.
Yes.
And even improving one's prognosis after a colorectal cancer risk by adopting a healthy diet and lifestyle.
Yes.
But a very important part of that message, of course, Vicky, is that low risk is not no risk.
Yes.
So if you have symptoms, go and get checked out. If we look at the Seventh-day Adventist community, Loma Linda, California is a good example.
Yep.
So this is a genetically diverse community.
Yes.
The Blue Zone, right?
Yes,
Yeah, exactly,
yes,
right?
yeah.
So they put a great emphasis on physical activity and family and community and faith and vegetarian eating.
Yes.
And even the Seventh-day Adventists who do consume animal products consume very little, less than 20 kilos of meat per year compared to the US average of about 110 kilos per person per year.
Yep.
So among that population, they have very low risks of heart disease and type 2 diabetes, obesity and other conditions that we think are inevitable, right?
Yes, yes.
They also have a reduced risk of colon cancer. And among the Seventh-day Adventists who eat meat, even though they eat very little meat, the risk of colorectal cancer compared to the background US population is about 30% lower. And among the Seventh-day Adventists who don't eat meat at all, the risk reduction, I think, is about 32 or 36% lower.
Right.
So that's substantial. I mean, in the UK, we've got 42,000 people diagnosed with colorectal cancer every year. Could we reduce that number by 30 or 40 or 50%? I think we can.
Yes.
But there's still, the disease still happens.
Yes.
So if you do have symptoms, please go and have a chat to your doc and get checked out.
Absolutely. So if the result is squeaky clean, does that rule out any issue? Or could it be like at a cellular level or irritable bowel or something like that? Because I've got a friend who had... Go on. Now, I've got a friend who had a test done and he's always rushing to the toilet and, things irritate him. And he had a colonoscopy done and it was like the doctor said to him, I don't need to see you pretty much ever again. It's such a clean looking bowel or like intestines. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on it is that gastroenterology is about more than doing a colonoscopy and a gastroscopy.
Yes, okay.
And there are lots of different issues that can be causing problems. Everything from celiac disease to microscopic colitis to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth to, even more subtle and rare conditions such as functional neuroendocrine tumors and things like that. Not to worry your friend, but I'm just speaking in general terms.
Yes.
That if you have significant digestive health problems,
yes,
and you've had the basic blood tests, you've had the colonoscopy and the endoscopy, and your doctor has reassured you that nothing is wrong,
yes,
but if your quality of life is still terrible, then it's worth asking to be referred to a GI. Yes. Just to get into the rabbit hole, Vicky, and go, looking at other things and digestive enzyme production, etc.
Yeah.
So it's very individual, but it is definitely worth asking to be referred to a GI, and also just looking at other aspects of your life. Obviously, personal and emotional stress are a huge driver of digestive symptoms as well. Definitely. The gut-brain connection is real.
Yes.
And I mean, I spend a lot of time at my clinic talking to patients what they can do to reduce their stress levels, whether that's just being selfish and taking some time out for themselves each day, getting home in the evening and switching off the email, switching off their screens, whether that's engaging in mindful meditation. These things all help too, because the gut-brain axis is real, and reducing your stress levels can also improve your digestive health.
Totally. So, I mean, this sounds like an obvious one, but do you believe that gut health and diet play a role in one's longevity? Fairly obvious.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, that's absolutely. I mean, there was a nice study published in the UK about 2 years ago, and it showed that individuals who have a healthy diet and lifestyle, and part of that, a really important part of that, is about eating the most fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and legumes, and having a high plant diet. What we saw was in the UK, if you tick all the right boxes for a healthy diet and lifestyle, which will automatically give you good gut health as well, in general, then the average female will have 10 and a half extra healthy years. Amazing. The average male will have about 9 extra healthy years. So extra years free of major diseases.
Perfect.
And those are really, really important years. That could be the difference between seeing your grandchildren go to primary school and seeing them, graduate university.
Absolutely.
So the evidence is very clear. I often hear people saying, "Oh, look, I don't want to, cook food and eat a healthy plant-based diet and stop smoking and reduce my alcohol intake and take a little bit of exercise and maybe moderation will be good enough for me." And look, that's fine. But if you think that moderation is the way you want to go, if you want to have a moderately good quality of life and a moderately healthy life and a moderately long life expectancy, then that's fine. But I just want to make sure that people have the info, that they know the science, that they know how beneficial this can be. And once they have all the info, they can make their own decision.
Absolutely. Exactly. So do you find a lot of people ignore signs and symptoms of disease? Obviously it's really easy to brush something off as like indigestion or endometriosis or something they've eaten. Or what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's harder to diagnose something, particularly if it's just a one-off? Does it need to be something that's like causing them quite a bit of grief before they do explore it?
It's very variable.
Yeah.
I think some people, men are terrible at this.
Yes.
And I'm saying that as a man myself. We don't like going to see the doctor. I will often meet patients, male patients who are in their 50s who have significant digestive health issues, and they haven't seen their GP since they had their childhood vaccinations or maybe their COVID shot in more recent times. So yes, I think some people are very reluctant to go and see their doctor.
Yes. And
maybe that's fear, and maybe that's that feeling that, okay, these conditions are very common, but it can't happen to me. So it's a normal human belief, isn't it? That, okay, I've been losing weight, I've got dreadful abdominal pain and bloating, and I'm using the bathroom 10 times a day, but I'll just power through. Just power through because maybe it's just me.
Yep.
And it's a shame because in most cases there won't be a serious underlying health disorder.
Right.
But if you do go to see a good GI and get checked out, as I said earlier, you may arrive at a diagnosis that can be addressed, and having good digestive health can be transformative. I mean, I had a patient at clinic recently who, and I mean, this happens all the time at my clinic, but patients saying, not only do I feel normal now, but I feel more normal than I felt in years.
Wow.
And I'd forgotten what normal was like. So it's certainly worth engaging with a health professional and maybe a registered dietitian if you have significant health problems, because they may be able to help you to restore your quality of life, which is what we're all after, right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, cancer or any type of disease can be quite insidious, but what are the main signs and symptoms people should be looking for if they do have something that's quite serious?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, if we're talking about serious cancer type diagnoses, these are things that we really worry about people. Well, I used to say over the age of 50, but in terms of colorectal cancer now, the demographics have changed as our diet and lifestyle changed, so over the age of 40. So things like unexplained abdominal pain, loss of appetite, weight loss, feeling full whilst eating a meal, suddenly not being able to eat a full meal that you used to be able to eat, having a tender point in your tummy, or feeling like there's something hard inside your tummy.
Yes.
An unexplained change in your bowel habit, where you've gone from having, your regular bowel habit to now having a very different bowel habit or stool consistency.
Yes.
Seeing blood or mucus in the toilet, of course. These are all symptoms that should prompt you to go and have a chat with your doc, and they can have a chat with you, examine your tummy, take your family history, look at your risk factors, They may do some basic blood tests, full blood count, kidney function, liver function. They may do a blood test to check for celiac disease, which is a very common condition and is often on a standard panel of blood tests now at GP practices. They may even ask you to do some poop tests to look for blood loss or to look for abnormal inflammation. And it's quite likely if your symptoms have any of what we doctors refer to as red flags, which I've just summarized, it's quite likely that they'll refer you possibly for an abdominal ultrasound scan or a CT scan, or they may ask you to go see a GI just to get checked out.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. I mean, in Australia, there's quite a lot of collagen supplements, animal-based, that have been promoted for gut health and become quite popular of late. But I feel that health-conscious consumers have been fairly misguided and misled by this information. What's your opinion on animal collagen supplements?
Well, the concept of taking collagen supplements as a kind of a panacea for health has been around for millennia, right? Shark fin, refined collagen, people eating, animal hoofs and things like that, and for collagen. And why that might sound a little bit icky to people, that's what animal-based collagen supplements are.
Right. So
they're ground up bones and tendons or fins or hoofs. I mean, that's what you're having, or skin. So it's ground up skin.
Yes.
So it's kind of that kind of slightly magical thinking that in many ways has plagued medicine, Yes. So if I want to be strong like an ox, I should eat beef. Yeah. That's not true.
That's right.
If I want to have virility, I'm going to eat some piece of a virile animal, okay? Without being too explicit, okay?
Yes, yeah.
And if I want to have really good quality skin, I'll just eat skin.
Yes.
I'll eat lots of skin, and then that'll give me good skin. So it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing. So collagen is... Yeah, so people forget that humans are animals too.
Yes.
So our bodies contain collagen.
Yes.
Our skin, 70% of the dry weight of human skin is collagen.
Yes.
It's a structural protein which our bodies manufacture, just like everything else in our bodies. And the human body is pretty smart. We can take the amino acids in our fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. We eat them. They get broken down into their constituent amino acids. So if you eat a piece of collagen or a bean or a grain of rice, that gets broken down into its constituent amino acids.
Yes.
And then your body uses those building blocks to build the proteins and peptides that make up your human body.
Yes. Alongside
everything else that makes up your human body. So you don't need to eat somebody else's skin in order to have healthy skin.
That's right.
So I think that's my verdict on that. And then I mean, I have seen some public health professionals expressing concerns about the fact that often these products might be sourced using some of the products that were banned from human consumption after the BSE crisis several years ago. And also that by their nature, things like bones and hoofs tend to concentrate heavy metals from the environment like cadmium. So by having these foods, you might be unwittingly causing yourself some harm.
Absolutely. No, I'm so happy to hear that because I feel like there's so many consumers who get ripped off because they also charge quite a lot for those products. So, just done a really good job of marketing it, I think.
That's it. I mean, there's so much food confusion out there anyway.
Yes.
But the industry does a great job of marketing this stuff. So I'm not blaming people. I mean, people are flooded with information. I mean, you see even a lot of online influencers will say, "Oh yeah, thank you, I just got my collagen supplement." I think maybe one of the Kardashians was promoting collagen supplements, but you got to remember that's a commercial arrangement.
Absolutely.
That person is being paid to promote a product, and their interest isn't your health.
Yep.
It's the bottom line.
Exactly. Interesting. So tell us, I love you've coined the happiness effect, which is what you referred to quite a bit, and that's how diet affects our overall happiness and mental health. Explain that to the listeners, please.
It's something I had to include in the book, Vicki, because it comes up all the time.
I love it.
I've been very fortunate as a doctor, through public speaking, through challenges that we've run in my locality, and also through our online course, the Happy Gut course that I run with my friends Stephen and David Flynn. I've been very fortunate to help, I think probably, much more than 10,000 people, so thousands of people to make the switch to a plant-based diet, right?
Brilliant.
And when you check in with people as to how they're doing, happiness comes up all the time. So whether that person has made the switch to plants because they want to achieve a healthier body weight, reduce their blood pressure, reduce their impact on the environment, or reduce the risk of a future zoonotic pandemic like COVID, when you check in with them after 5 or 6 weeks, they usually say something like, I feel good. I feel lighter. I feel more energetic. I had a friend of mine who's a chef who made the switch to a plant-based diet about 6 months ago, and I checked in with him. He said, I'm being nicer to people.
Yes.
And it could just be that this happiness effect is because you're eating in a really healthy way.
Yes.
And spending more time in the kitchen always cheers me up. Chopping veg is very therapeutic.
Yep.
But there's a lot of reasons and a lot of science telling us why eating more plants might make you happier. So when you take the animal products out of your diet, you're reducing your consumption of products that promote chronic inflammation and have been linked to depression. Such as advanced glycation end products and arachidonic acid. And you're also increasing your intake of phytonutrients and antioxidants. And the more of those in your bloodstream, the less likely you are to have psychological stress and depressive symptoms.
Amazing.
We also know that when we're eating a diet that is, high in complex carbohydrates, it also favorably affects the way our body metabolizes tryptophan, which is a substance our brains use to make the happy hormone serotonin. Serotonin is 5-hydroxytryptophan.
Yeah, there you go.
So if you're eating a high complex carb diet, you mobilize more tryptophan in your bloodstream, so you got higher levels in your blood and your brain. And we've seen numerous studies out there showing, that this is a real effect. So one of the biggest meta-analyses on diet and psychological stress and depressive symptoms showed that people with a high total intake of fruits and vegetables do have higher levels of optimism, less stress, less depressive symptoms.
Beautiful.
And if you take someone who doesn't make it to their five a day, that very kind of modest target, I think in Australia the target is 8 servings a day, right, of fruits and vegetables. If you take someone and simply get them to eat more fruits and vegetables and get to 8 servings a day, it can have the same positive effect on their mental health as moving from being an unemployed person to landing a new job.
Amazing.
And then also the gut microbes. When you feed your gut microbes more plants, they produce more short-chain fatty acids, and they also will produce and respond to neurohormones like serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and GABA. So there's lots of science there showing us why food and a healthy gut microbiome helps us to feel happier. And it's something that comes up in my practice all the time, which is why we had to put it in the book.
Yes, it's brilliant. Amazing. Lucky last question for you. What are your top 3 tips to living a longer, stronger, happier and healthier life?
Well, look, number 1, eat a whole food plant-based diet. I got to say it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've just been talking about it for the last hour or whatever, so that's absolutely crucial. Number 2, fostering a sense of community. I mean, we're just coming out of a period of enforced social isolation. If you're lucky enough to live somewhere where you are now able to get out in person and communicate with people, just rekindle those relationships, because having close personal friendships and friends who can support you is an independent predictor of having a longer and healthier life. And why not now? I mean, there's never been a better time to join the plant-based diet revolution. Why not hook up with a few friends and say, hey, let's do this. We can come to each other's homes for meals now. Let's get on this. And that's sharing food and meeting up and fostering a sense of community is incredibly important. And then my third thing is just to spend time outdoors in natural environments. So human beings' natural environment is woods and countryside and beaches. And the data showing that spending time in natural environments benefits our mental health and our overall health is compelling. And of course, the gut microbes that are crucial allies on our journey to better health, they don't just enjoy a variety of plants in our diet, Vicky. They also enjoy and benefit from us spending time in natural environments.
Yes.
Because that's where our gut microbes come from.
Absolutely.
They come from our surroundings.
Yes.
So spending time in nature would have to be my number 3 tip.
Amazing. Incredible. So tell us, where can people find you?
If you look on Instagram, just look for Dr. Alan Desmond. You'll find me there.
Yes.
I'm a very busy full-time doctor, so I'm not across all platforms, Vicky. I'm generally just on Instagram. You might find me on Facebook too. And if you're looking for the book, you can get it anywhere that books are sold. So
Excellent.
It's obviously on Amazon, but also all the major booksellers should have it. It's in Australia, New Zealand, the US, Europe, the UK, Ireland. Book Depository will ship it worldwide. Or why not just ask your local bookstore or library to order a copy for you.
Amazing. Incredible. And I do recommend checking out Alan's Instagram page. There's always lots of great food inspiration on there as well. Thank you so much for your time, Alan. You are such a wealth of knowledge and so passionate. It's been very refreshing talking to you, and wish you have a wonderful day, and we look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Vicky, thanks very much for having me on. I totally appreciate your time and all you're doing to kind of spread the word among your network. So thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and follow me on our YouTube channel, One Body, One Life, to see more inspirational videos to help you reach optimal wellness and longevity. But until next time, don't forget, you've got to nourish to flourish.